Hi, I'm Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first official week of July. And of course, welcome to summer. It has arrived. It is hot. And with summer, as you know, every single year, we have our summer series. And this is the number one show of our summer series. It is one of your favorites. What we do for the next 6 weeks is we have all the shows from the last year that were your favorites. And yes, you're going to hear them again for the next 6 weeks. And the first show is with Carolyn Strawson, and we are talking all about narcissistic abuse. She was phenomenal. You're going to absolutely love this show. She is a wealth of information. This is a show probably we should listen to multiple times, like many, many times. There's so much information. I think you're going to really, really enjoy the show. So I'm not going to be live and have new shows for you, but if you want some new material, you can always check me out on social. You know, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on all the things, you know. And yes, I feel like I need a little drum roll here. I'm being worn down. My team is wearing me down, telling me I must be on TikTok. So yes, I will make that announcement when it happens. It's coming. I'll leave it at that. It's coming. It's coming. But for now, come on over to Instagram and Facebook. Would love to connect with you guys there. So here we go. We've got Carolyn Strawson coming up on the show. Think you're going to love it. So welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast, Caroline.
Hello, I'm so privileged and honored to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
I feel the one that's honored to have you. I have to tell you, I mean, I was just reading about your story and it really touched my heart. I was like, oh my gosh, what a story you have, but what a journey you've had just in the last 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Has it been since 2011 that you just like, I'm like looking at your bio, like, holy moly, you've done a lot. Yeah.
Probably for me, when I think about when did the journey start? I mean, obviously life is the journey, isn't it? But the kind of journey as in what's happening in my life kind of thing was probably 2009. And that was when my mum passed away really, really suddenly. And I suppose from then onwards, I suppose it's just been this catalogue of events initially of my mum passing away. I didn't even realize I was in an abusive relationship with a covert narcissist. And then he left myself and my children. We found out we were in over $100,000 worth of debt. I ended up having my family home repossessed, and I literally lost everything. And that word loss came up a lot for me. I lost my home. I lost money. I lost my mother. I lost my marriage. I lost the hope of what this idyllic family would be like, this happy ever after. And there was such a sense of loss, and I got diagnosed with complex post-traumatic distress disorder. I had anxiety, depression. I was self-harming. Each morning I was trying not to have a panic attack. Sometimes I'd win, sometimes I wouldn't.
Wow.
But literally my two children at the time, who were nearly 3 and 6, they were really the only reason I was getting out of bed each morning, because if I wasn't there, who was going to look after them? So, I mean, thank goodness they were there, because I probably wouldn't be sat here talking to you today. But it was a really dark and low time in my life where I felt like I was getting older. And of course, that's when you think, yes, you should be growing and, everything should be increasing in your life. And I felt like, oh my goodness, my life is going backwards. I'm losing everything. I don't have any money. Money coming in didn't equal money going out. And I was really at rock bottom in all of that. And I felt really scared. I felt full of shame, very guilty that, I was brought up on these fairy tale books when I was growing up. So it was kind of Prince Charming, happily ever after. And there I was as a single mum with a broken home, as society likes to call it. So yeah, I felt a lot of shame and guilt around all of that as well.
Wow. Wow. That is so much with your mother passing and then having this happen. I mean, that had to I can't even imagine. I would be the same way. I wouldn't even want to get out of bed having all that happen.
And I think as well, having it happen, I mean, anything, divorce, people passing away, of course, that's really traumatic to our system anyway. But I didn't realize I'd been in an abusive relationship. I didn't really even know what a narcissist was. And it was only actually at the time that my therapist said to me, go and Google. And she actually said narcissistic personality disorder. She said, go and Google that. And I remember going home and literally Googling that. And just literally, it was almost like my jaw was like, oh my goodness. It was like this light bulb. And the great thing about reading it was, maybe it wasn't my fault, kind of came up. But equally, the whole diagnostic element of all of this, of medicalizing it, is this an excuse then why he treated me like all of this? And this, again, is all the things that I talk about in the work that I do. But I didn't really know. For me, a narcissist was somebody who walked into a room and kind of commanded attention and was very confident, kind of look at me. I didn't know there was such a thing as a covert narcissist. And actually, what I teach in my coaching program, there's 10 different types of narcissists. But my ex was a covert narcissist. So somebody who really almost acted like the victim themselves, who would really smear my reputation and started to come out with these things. And I almost wanted to walk behind him if I saw him speaking to any of our friends with this megaphone or something, and go, right, can I just tell you the truth now? Because I think when you're dealing with a covert narcissist, they can portray themselves that, well, hold on, she's the crazy one. She's the problem. And of course, that really contributed to already my feelings of lack of self-worth and not feeling good enough. So if other people then started to think, well, maybe it was her, maybe it is her fault, that just really, it was like ripping the scab off what were already what I call my self-worthiness wounds. And that actually made me feel even worse. So not only was the kind of divorce and the separation traumatic in itself, it didn't end then, it carried on. And that is what I found really, really difficult, because I was almost waiting for him to apologize, for him to suddenly say, oh, Caroline, I'm so sorry I treated you like that. So sorry I did X, Y, Z in our relationship. And I kind of kept waiting and waiting. And And even with sort of contact with the children, I desperately wanted to try and co-parent successfully, because of course that's what society says we should do. We should co-parent. And every single time I would try and co-parent, I was just met with counter-parenting all of the time. And every now and again, I'd be like, right, that's it. And I'd block him and everything else. And then I'd see him at the door occasionally and it seemed okay. So I'd think, well, maybe it'll be okay again. And then bang, okay. And I was stuck in this trauma bond, this cycle of abuse still. And it was really only when I implemented extreme modified contact and started to parallel parent that actually really, that was when I really started to heal. So I always say to my clients, if you were trying to recover from a drug addiction, you wouldn't walk around constantly injecting yourself with that drug. And that's what I was almost doing when I was interacting and trying to sort of prove my worth as a mom and as a woman, as a wife, etc., etc. So the moment I cut that off and really set up extreme modified contact, that gave my system an opportunity then to actually heal, because really prior to that, I was looking at him changing for me to feel better. If I could get him to understand why I feel like this, what he's done and everything else, then surely he would see that, and then everything would kind of be okay. Even if we weren't back together, we would be able to co-parent effectively. And of course, that never happened. So initially I was waiting for that epiphany of him changing to then be okay for me to move forward. And of course, that isn't the case, because we can't change anybody, especially a narcissist. We can't do that. So I had to then begin this journey, this self-healing journey of going within and thinking, why was I attracted to a narcissist? Why am I feeling like this when he behaves like that? Because trauma isn't a person, it's not an event, it's what I feel and what I'm saying to myself about those events. That was what my trauma was. You know, my ex-husband wasn't my trauma. My trauma was my ex-husband's behavior and me going, he's behaving like this because I'm worthless and I'm not good enough. That's what was in my activation in my body. And that meant then I had to go back and think, well, why do I feel worthless? Why have I got these self-worthiness wounds of not feeling good enough, feeling worthless? Where have they come from? Because I actually thought I'd had a really good childhood, genuinely. And I think, you know, we hear a lot about people's childhoods and, you know, and there's some horrific childhoods. And I've worked with many clients who have had that. But when I look back at this stage, I thought, my childhood's not been that bad, you know, surely not. But it really started me on this journey of starting to understand my parents and their behavior. I wouldn't say my dad is a narcissist, but he's really unemotional. And even to this day, I'm 48. He's never said, I'm proud of you or I love you. He just doesn't do that. And I didn't realize that my interpretation of him not behaving like that had really created these self-worthiness wounds of I'm not good enough, I'm worthless. So for me, I do a lot of internal family systems in the work that I do. And we look at different parts of us. And it really made me start to realize then that I wasn't living as my true self. I was living blended with my protector parts, protecting me from feeling these self-worthiness wounds. And very much as a child, when I look back, my protector parts were people-pleasing, perfectionism, achieving, you know, all in the hope that if I distracted away from all of that, then surely I'd feel better and I wouldn't feel the pain of what my system thought would be too painful to feel. And then as I got older, you know, that came obviously when I split up from my ex-husband, that was self-harm, dissociation, anger, anxiety, depression, all of these protector parts for me, just trying to distract and soothe me away from what my system perceived would be too painful for me to feel. But again, I had to go back and look at, well, where did these self-worthiness wounds form? What age, how, when, why? And it was my interpretation of my father's behavior. You know, I remember doing sort of little gymnastic routines in the lounge when I was growing up. And my dad would be the judge and I'd be there prancing around as this 7-year-old little girl. And my dad would kind of literally sit there and go, 9.99 recurring. And I'd be kind of like, right, I'll do it again then. Because in my mind, I'd done it perfectly, you know. And I was like, I'll do it again. I'll do it again. So there I would, I'd be doing my little routine and everything else. And again, 9.99 recurring. And at the time, I didn't realize actually that that moment, along with lots of other moments, really subtly like that, really started to form beliefs about myself, because he was my dad, you know. And I thought, well, I've done this really well. I've just got straight A's on my school report. You know, I'm captain of the school teams. I get great feedback from my teachers, but never once did I get, I'm proud of you. So my interpretation of that was, I must do more then. It's not enough what I'm doing. And that created that wound. And even as adults, as I've got 2 older sisters, even as adults, we would almost joke about my dad giving me 9.99 recurring. And before I even did my own inner healing, I was laughing about it as such, thinking, oh, you know, as a child, blah, 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 my father did this, not actually realizing the impact of our parents, the adult behavior upon us and our interpretation and perception of all of that. The opposite end of the spectrum with that was my mum was highly codependent. So she was very much of the, you know, you see why they were a magnet to each other.
Oh,
she
yeah.
was then she was very much then that her sense of worth came from being a mother. So, and again, I didn't realize the pressure actually that I'd felt as a child with that. So I was the youngest of three. And so I was actually at home with my parents for probably about 6 years on my own. So the pressure then for me as the youngest to still almost be that little baby, that little girl to my mom. So she felt a sense of worth as a mother. And I would say that even when my mum passed away, sort of in 2009, and then I got a divorce the following year, had my mum been around when I got a divorce, I don't think I'd have I mean, I didn't handle it great anyway, let's be honest, to start off with. But I don't think I'd have handled it at all for longer, because I'd have looked to my mum to rescue me, to make me feel better, because that would feed her self-worthiness wounds of, I'm a good mum because I'm looking after Caroline. And I would then look to my mum to make me feel better of my self-worthiness wounds of not feeling good enough because I'm going through a divorce. So actually, of course, I wish my mum was here today. But actually, from a sort of universe perspective in that order, actually, that probably enabled me to be where I am today with all of that. So my mum was very much this woman who valued, and her own sense of worth came from being a mother. So again, when I left home, so I was the last one to leave home, it's really tough on my mom. And also knowing what my dad was like as well, I felt that sense of responsibility to still look after my mom. I was the daughter who moved back to live closer to my parents as I got older. Not my two sisters, it was me. And it's really interesting as well when we talk about family dynamics, because my two older sisters, they'd never have got in a relationship with a narcissist ever. And we often have these conversations, why did I do that? And when we look at our child, my sister was the eldest. And then my middle sister, she had a heart condition when she had a hole in her heart when she was born. So a lot of attention, rightly so, went to my middle sister when we were growing up. And obviously being really kind of worried about my sister's health and going to the hospital. And my mum and dad really built my middle sister up to be almost invincible because she had her operation and she was and everything else. And it was almost like I was the youngest child going, what about me? What about me? And it's no coincidence that as I've got older, how much I've used illness on occasion to try and get attention from others. So I had my tonsils out when I was 11. My sister's heart operation was when she was 11 as well. And it's really interesting to think about those kind of illness protector parts. And I've even noticed it. I had a DVT even 18 months ago, and my system is still in that stage where if I'm feeling unloved, it's almost like, well, hold on, let's get you an illness because that might get you some attention, get you some love or things like that. And obviously I work within my system and I can recognize all of this and everything too. But it's just really interesting how our system all of the time is working to keep us safe, keep us alive, and protect us and move us away from the biggest perceived pain. And I think this is the key, how I work with my clients, because they come to me and they're sort of in pain. And I'll say to them, but your system thinks the pain you are in right now is actually less painful than something else. And we need to get curious about what is that something else? When did that happen? Because very often that is a stuck, wounded, younger part of yourself that your system is still running on trying to protect you from feeling. And if we can work on what that younger self worthiness wound is, then those roles of those protector parts won't need to keep coming up for you because they recognize you're an adult now and you are able to function and you are able to move forward, you are able to cope. Doesn't mean that it isn't painful or challenging, but what it means is you now recognize you are safe. And I think that's where I teach my clients a lot of psych education around polyvagal theory, the nervous system, and that when we feel safe and connected, it doesn't mean there's not challenge going on in our life. It just means we recognize that we're not in any danger. That moment we tip into fight, flight, or freeze, our brain and body's like, this is dangerous, this is threatening, we need to react appropriately within our nervous system. But very often we're not in actual danger, it's our perception of danger from our past experiences and those wounds that got formed, and our system's just going, oh, can't get you feeling like that again that you felt at 3, 5, 7, or 10. So we need to react in the present right now to protect you from feeling like that. And that's when all of those parts come up.
Oh my gosh, that was so great. I'm like, I have been taking all these notes. Like, wait, I want to ask her about this. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
That was a wealth of information just alone right there.
It is. I'm so passionate about it. I think because I felt so much shame. I think that's the thing. So much shame and guilt about, why was I so stuck for so long? Why was I attracting someone like that? Why was I feeling like that? I'm an intelligent woman. How could that happen to me? And I felt so much shame, and looking at my children thinking, oh my goodness, I've got no money now. We're in, there's just the three of us. Yeah, there was just so much shame surrounding all of that.
So I want to ask you about, there's so many things I wrote down I want to talk about. So, and I love when you said you're working with your therapist and you said, your therapist said to you, go Google. I've done this. I've been a therapist and coach for 25 years. Same thing. I'm like, can you please go home and Google narcissism? Because in session, they might argue and go, no, I'm not with a narc. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know that you are or not. Go home and Google it and let me know what you figure out. So, and they always come back the next session, absolutely surprised, like, oh my gosh, that's me. What about, let me ask you this question. In your experience in working with people, do we attract these narcissistic partners if we have healthy self-worth?
No.
So, right? Yeah.
Absolutely not. So when we are born and we come into this world, we all have a sense of self, the essence of who we are. Someone who is compassionate, someone who is living with clarity, curious, creative, all of those wonderful traits that we naturally have. It's not taught, it's just within us. Then what happens, usually in our childhood, dependent on our caregivers, our parents, siblings, teachers, friends, peers, their behaviors, we start to interpret in certain ways and perceive that rightly or wrongly. And that starts to create a belief about what we think about ourselves, because no child is going to think an adult is at fault if they're behaving in a certain way. What a child will always think is, they're behaving like that because of me, so that must mean I'm not lovable, good enough, worthless, etc., etc. So that creates that wound. Now, that wound then becomes all-encompassing for our system to try and never feel the pain of that. Because in those moments when we feel it, it's like our brain goes, whoa, this is too painful for us to ever feel. Don't worry, I'm going to try everything we can for you to not feel like this again. And that becomes the wound. And that's then, like I mentioned earlier, we blend with these protector parts to try and distract and soothe away from ever feeling like that. So when you talk about, does somebody with a healthy sense of self attract a narcissist? Well, a narcissist also has self-worthiness wounds. A narcissist, from the research we know currently, no narcissist is born. They are created again from their childhood. That doesn't mean that there's not a generational link of how their parents parent, and we can trace that back from a generational perspective. But it doesn't necessarily mean they'll become a narcissist, so to speak. So we know they are created in childhood. And again, how I look at narcissism isn't necessarily as a medical diagnosis. I don't necessarily agree with the DSM, with the diagnostic nature of narcissistic personality disorder. Firstly, because they only list 9 traits. I teach over 35 traits that a narcissist will have. So there's a lot more to that necessarily than that. And that, again, like covert narcissism, community narcissism, things like that, it's so expansive. So if you imagine we all have that sense of self, Then we have those self-worthiness wounds, which we call exiles in internal family systems. And then we blend with protector parts. Now, protector parts of somebody like a codependent, like myself, someone with a lack of a healthy sense of self, my protector parts were things like people pleasing, perfectionism, high achieving, etc. A narcissist protector parts will be things like manipulation, abuse, coercion, anger, all of gaslighting. All of these are actually protector parts of that individual. But I like to call all of the narcissist protector parts, that individual, they're all narcissistic. These are all, it's like the umbrella term for an individual's protector parts that are then narcissistic. And the magnet then of that codependent and the narcissist, the starting point is actually very similar. And again, from a research perspective, we don't know, why does someone then become a codependent as such? And why does someone become a narcissist? And we don't necessarily know the definitive answer to that. We just know it happens. And that narcissist then obviously wants to take to make their wounds feel better. And by nature of a narcissist protector parts, the manipulation, the control, the gaslighting is like a magnet then to the codependent, who is this people pleaser. I'll show you how good enough I am. I will please you. I will do all of these things. So the codependent is giving, trying to soothe their self-worthiness wounds. The narcissist is like, give it to me. I'll take to soothe their self-worthiness wounds, which is why initially it seems like a match made in heaven. It seems like, wow, great relationship. This is really good. However, what arises then is nothing is ever going to be good enough for a narcissist, because they will constantly need that narcissistic supply to soothe their own wounds. And what might start off to be a good relationship, this is if obviously it's a partnership relationship as opposed to parents, that if it seems like everything is okay to start with, that people pleaser to start off with might think, oh, this is great. But then they'll do something one day and maybe the narcissist will say something, and then the codependent kind of thinks, well, hold on a second, I did that a few days ago and that seemed okay. Why is this happening? That codependent doesn't think, well, their problem then, off they can go.
Right.
What the codependent thinks is, I must have done something wrong. I need to do more. I need to be more again. So that sets the codependent off then in a unattainable goal to ever be good enough for a narcissist. And I always say there's 3 ways you leave a narcissistic relationship. 1, they leave you, as happened in my scenario. 1, you actually die in that relationship, and that can be from suicide, or it can be you just end up staying in that relationship forevermore. And 3, and the third one is you manage to crawl away somehow. You manage with whomever safely to crawl away from all of that. You know, I have never seen a healthy relationship ever with a narcissist. The other person just, I mean, when I look back at my relationship with my ex-husband, I just think, gosh, just completely lost myself. Literally, I was a shell. I wore grey, black clothes, didn't look in the mirror. I put on a lot of weight. Literally, I was just lost myself completely. So, you know, that kind of magnet that you have of the narcissist and the codependent, the good thing for the codependent is we can work on those self-worthiness wounds, because a codependent will acknowledge and take ownership of, yeah, I am a people pleaser. Yes, I am this. And then we can work with that codependent to work on those self-worthiness wounds. The sad thing, and it is a sad thing, is if I said to a narcissist, hey, listen, I know we've got childhood wounds. I know there's some self-worthiness wounds there. You know, let's work on that. A narcissist would automatically come back and say, hold on a second, the only reason I'm behaving like this is because they are behaving like that.
God, yes.
There's no ownership. There's no ownership or responsibility of their behavior, of that subjective distress that they cause other people. It's always like, no, I behave like this because of somebody else. So there's no ownership of that. And I would love to say, send the narcissist my way. I will work with them and I'll work on their wounds. But sadly, we can't. And I think this is one of the key things as well, Michelle, is that in our society, when we talk, it's not that I'm not compassionate about how a narcissist was even formed and how they came,
Mm-hmm.
because I am, and I can see they're very wounded people, but I can't help somebody that doesn't acknowledge that they need to be helped, or that they want to change, or that there are issues at the heart of all of that. So it doesn't mean I don't feel compassion, but at the end of the day, abuse is abuse. There's no getting away from it. And just because we can explain why a narcissist is the way that they are does not excuse their behavior, and it isn't acceptable. So I'm not going to spend all my time trying to get a narcissist to recognize this, because I'm going to be wasting my time, let's be honest. I want to get out there and educate people and help those who have been in relationships with a narcissist and feel activated by that, because the narcissist is never going to change. And even 11 years on from my divorce, my ex-husband has never changed. Even a couple of days ago, he's messaging me at midnight. Okay. It's not changed. However, he hasn't changed. My reaction to his behavior now, I don't see it as a reflection of me not being good enough anymore.
Mm.
Seeing his behavior coming from a place of self, not blended with my parts, trying to protect a wound. So I see that. And of course, it's challenging. I don't want to be getting texts at midnight, so to speak. However, I don't respond, I don't react, because I don't feel I need to prove anything to him at all. 11 years ago, if he'd have done that, I'd have been replying back, and we'd have had ping pong of messages, because I'd be wanting to prove it and get him to see and everything else. Whereas now, I don't need to do that. So the healing journey, when you're involved with a narcissist, isn't about the narcissist. It's about you. It's about you coming back to your sense of self. So rather than responding blended with your parts, you're responding coming from a place of self, recognizing challenging situation, but not dangerous, where I need to go into a fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm. Okay. There's 3 pages of questions. How long do we have, Caroline? Okay. I want to point out, I would like, you to point out, you use the word abuse.
Yeah.
So many people think of abuse as physical abuse. Please explain narcissistic abuse. And that's what's so hard, I think, is that when we're abused or we're being abused, we don't even know it, because there are no black and blue marks. Nobody's punching me. I'm not being abused. So therefore, again, we flip it back and say, well, it must be me. I need to change. Something's wrong with me. So just talk just for a moment about abuse.
Yeah. And I think you make
what it is. I mean, we don't.
It is. You make such a great point, because, and again, the whole legal system around narcissistic abuse globally, this isn't just in specific countries, it's completely broken, because it's not trauma informed. Because just as you say, the police, the court system tend to only take it really seriously if you're there with a broken nose, or you've got, bruises on your body. And psychological abuse can be really hard to prove, because really it's your word against theirs. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, they are very good with their words. They are very manipulative, and they can portray themselves, like I said, to be the victim in all of this too.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah. So they look like it's this high conflict relationship, where it isn't. It's just somebody who is in trauma and in a trauma response, and then the other person really trying to take advantage of all of that. And any form of abuse is really taking away that sense of self for you. And like you say, the acknowledgement. I work with so many that, again, do not realize that it's abuse. I had someone the other day, and she'd written out literally on an A4 piece of paper, but it wasn't, he was tired that day, or there was this. And I said, no, I said, this is abuse, because it's not a one-off. I get it if you'd have said he said this as a one-off because he'd had a really busy day at work, but you are telling me that this is happening pretty much on a daily basis. It's these throwaway comments all of the time that in isolation you could kind of make excuses for. But when you put them all together, and I think this is the key when we talk about psychological abuse, and again, this is why it is good to talk about this, because just because you might have a bad breakup or an argument with somebody. It doesn't make them a narcissist just because you don't get on with them. It's
Mm-mm.
so much more than that. And narcissism is really, lots of traits and behaviors that someone exhibits really in all aspects of their life, personal, professional, familial, across the whole board of their life on a daily basis, where it will always be showing up and coming up for you. And I think, that abuse comes from manipulation, making you doubt yourself, making you feel like it is your fault, which is why somebody like a codependent with those self-worthiness wounds is such an ideal partner for a narcissist, because very often they won't then go out and talk to somebody. It actually isolates them even more, because if they're in that abusive relationship and they start to think, well, it must be me, rather than going and talking to a friend or a family member and just say, well, they said this, and perhaps they've had family members say before, well, maybe they're tired, maybe they're this, that actually makes that individual feel even worse and pushes them even more into a trauma response. It isolates them even more, because if you have friends and family, very often with good intentions, offering advice, just leave or just ignore them or just this, and then you find it really difficult to do that, not because cognitively you don't recognize maybe that would be the best thing to do. This is why trauma is a real somatic experience, because your body is saying it actually feels safer to stay in this relationship than to leave. Because if I leave and I have nobody, then that's even worse for me, because then I must really be worthless. But at least if I'm in this relationship, I've got some breadcrumbs, and breadcrumbs are better than starving. And that's what the system feels like. So when someone stays even in an abusive relationship, it's not because they are weak. And it really, really isn't because they're weak. It's actually because their whole system is set up that it feels safer to stay for them than to leave. And if you really want to support somebody who you know is in an abusive relationship, just listen, just be there. No judgment, no nothing.
Mm-mm.
Just support them. And if you have somebody talk to you about psychological abuse, or they are saying things, again, the best thing that you can do is help them increase their sense of worth, so that they can come from a place of self to safely then make their own decisions about all of that too. If you start judging them and offering advice about just leave, just do this, and then they don't, you're actually going to be isolating them even further and pushing them further down into a trauma response, because they're going to feel, well, I'm worthless in my relationship, and now I'm even more worthless because they're giving me this advice and I'm not even acting upon it either. So it actually makes them feel even worse.
But what are signs of abuse? Like, how would someone know that either they were even in a narcissistic relationship? Again, like if you're sitting with someone, like what would you say? Like, what are the signs that you see?
So I think that, there's so many signs that you would see, but people who are listening now might be thinking, well, okay, maybe is my partner a narcissist? What would come up with that? Are you doubting yourself? So are you finding that your partner says something to you, and you try and respond back, and then they're not actually listening to the words you are saying, but they're responding to how you are saying it? So they might be saying things like, oh, you're so sensitive, or, oh, I never said that, or not this again. And they're trying to deviate away by the manner in which you are saying something, rather than the actual words that you are saying in that situation. And that's gaslighting, when you then start to doubt yourself. So
Yeah, explain that, because that is a term that so many people don't even know what it means. So please just define gaslighting.
gaslighting is when you have somebody in your relationship that you really start to doubt yourself, doubt your answers, doubt, is this the truth? So let me give you some examples, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in my relationship, I remember one time that my husband was 8 hours late coming home from his work. And when he eventually arrived home, and I was really worried, I'd contacted the police and everything, he told me that he'd killed somebody at work because he hadn't done CPR correctly. Okay. So when he was saying this to me, one, I'd worked in the same place he'd worked in many years ago. Two, I have a medical background as well. So I started asking questions, because my gut was kind of going, well, hold on, that doesn't seem quite right. And I remember asking him some questions then about it, because I was really worried, where was he for all of this time? And I got met with, oh, stop it, I'm just in shock, I'm this, and I can't explain all of this. So I kind of left it a bit. Then the next day I'd try and bring it up again, and he just blanked me. He would not talk to me about it.
Mm.
And then I started to doubt myself. Then he started to look me in the eye and tell me this elaborate story about what happened. And this elaborate story that he was telling me, again, there was a part of me that was going, that can't happen. That can't have happened like that, because it wouldn't happen like that. But I've got my husband looking me in the eye, telling me this story. So when we talk about cognitive dissonance and stuff, I was almost at the stage where I either had to believe my husband, because he was my husband and surely he wouldn't lie that elaborately to me, surely, or not believe him. But what would the consequences be then if I kept going on and on and on about it? So in the end, I just didn't ask. And gaslighting is really when you end up doubting your version of reality, that you will think one thing and really think it, and it seems real. You said it, he said it, she said it, everything else. And then when you start to have that conversation, all of a sudden you start to, well, maybe it is that, or maybe it could be that. And you start to doubt yourself. And that then again isolates you even further, because you start to think, well, it must be me. I must be the crazy one. Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I am oversensitive. What is wrong with me? You bring it all back to you. And that's what the narcissist does. They project it all out onto you. So you end up questioning yourself. You end up wondering, what is your version of reality? And that then when you split up eventually, then that feeds into, again, she's the crazy one, she's this, she's that. And of course, you know, the more you almost then try and fight against it, you're almost reinforcing what they're saying then. So again, you isolate yourself even further, and you don't want to do that. But yeah, gaslighting is a really insidious form of psychological abuse, and it is a tool that a narcissist will use regularly.
Yeah.
Because you always have to think, however anybody behaves, it's almost like the brain has sort of choices of what to do. So if you think about it from a narcissist perspective, if I'm asking questions, genuine questions in this, the narcissist almost has two alternatives: to denigrate me and to make me be the crazy one, or actually take ownership and recognition of what they have done, which would really activate their wounds. That's never going to happen. So the intention of a narcissist, the primary intention, isn't necessarily to hurt you or gaslight you or abuse you. The impact of the narcissist intention is that it happens. The intention of a narcissist all of the time is to not feel their own wounds. And by nature of that, their behavior then becomes abusive, gaslighting, manipulative, all of those elements. So the impact of the intention of not feeling those wounds becomes all encompassing to that other person if they then have those wounds as well. You know, a lot of it is, how do you receive the narcissist behavior? Are you receiving it from a place of self, or are you receiving it as an activation to your wounds? And if you can differentiate between that, it means they don't change. It just means you are coming from a different place.
I think that is important, something you just said. And I want to ask you this in addition to what you just said. Do they even know consciously that they're manipulating, that they're gaslighting? Like, they're not intentionally doing this. This is a response to their wounding. Would you agree?
Yes. Some of them will be aware of it, but not to the conscious awareness, because that would tip probably then into psychopathy, really.
Right.
Aware of that.
Yeah.
But from a narcissist perspective, their intention all the way, because they are like a stuck younger child, basically, their intention all of the time is to not feel their worthless wounds. That is not what they want to feel. So everything in it, it's almost like the narcissist protector parts become the narcissist's false sense of self. You're never going to get beyond those protector parts ever to get to that wounded younger part. And again, sadly, that we're not going to be able to do that. And as research suggests right now, you know, there is medication that they will give to narcissists, because they do get a diagnosis sometimes, but they still don't have a healthy relationship at all. And I always think it's so dangerous when we go down the route where, people will say we can cure and heal narcissism and that. No, there is still no research to suggest we can do that. Maybe down the line there will be, I don't know. But at the moment, we can't. And if we start to go down the route of saying, yes, we can heal narcissism, how is that person then who feels like they have desperately tried to make their relationship work with a narcissist and it doesn't work? How are they then meant to feel, thinking, well, it works for other people, why isn't it working for me? What we're doing is we're making them feel even worse about the situation. So we have to be really mindful and careful about how we talk about narcissism. It's not about necessarily saying and not having compassion for a narcissist about where and how they have been created and where they've started from. But we can explain all of that, but it is no excuse for the abuse then that they perpetrate onto the victims that they then have. But it's always about them not feeling their wounds like this too. But we have to be really careful then about how we talk about all of that, because we want to help those people we can help in society, but we can still talk about why people are the way that they are as well, and we should be able to talk about that and still with compassion, but not to the extent where we're making excuses for their behavior either, because abuse is unacceptable in any format. It totally is, and we do not want to excuse. And I think sometimes when we diagnose, I have a big thing about the DSM, where a lot of the DSM is really labels that we put on protector parts to label symptoms of underlying trauma, like complex PTSD, which is what most people will have in a narcissistic relationship. And the same with narcissistic personality disorder, it's a label for symptoms of somebody with underlying trauma from childhood, and we label them as a narcissistic personality disorder. The thing is with narcissistic personality disorder, which is a bit different to a lot of the other things that are in DSM, is that we can't get to where to help them. We can with things borderline as a diagnosis, we can with things like depression and anxiety, so again, a lot of the work I do is we want the root cause of everything. We don't just want to look at the symptoms and XYZ and manage the symptoms. It's like, well, why do we feel like this? Why is it like that? Sadly, with a narcissist, we can look at why, we can look at root cause, but from a research perspective, we can't then help that yet.
So I'm wondering about this, because I have worked with some people over the 25 years that come in and say to me, I think I might be a narcissist. So there's an awareness. There is an awareness there. And I would wonder, I want your opinion, of course, if someone is aware and says, I think this is me, I think I'm doing this, can you help me? That's in someone that's aware. So would those type of narcissists, I think in my opinion, this is me, I think of narcissism on a scale. Some are unaware, and those people will not heal. They're so unaware, unfortunately. And I hate that for them. But then if they have some traits that are aware, can those people heal?
So I agree with you. Narcissism is on a spectrum. But for me, a narcissist, where they literally, it can be really interesting, this question, because it can bring up a number of things. One, narcissists will say that they're a narcissist to go to therapy because they will get supply from the therapist, and it will give them an excuse then to go back to their partner to say, well, my therapist said this.
Yes.
Treatment. The other side of the coin is, and this is something called mirror neurons that we have in our brain, because I get a lot of people in my community saying, I think I'm the narcissist, I think it's me. And what can happen when you are in a narcissistic relationship is sometimes your behavior can go quite narcissistic as well, because our brain then goes, well, if I'm in this narcissistic relationship, if I mirror their behavior, surely that will keep me safe then in this relationship, because I'm kind of being how they are being. So sometimes when you are looking at two people in a relationship, sometimes it can be hard to differentiate maybe who the narcissist is, because these mirror neurons that we have, we are matching the narcissist behavior in all of that to, again, from a trauma-informed lens, to try and stay safe in all of that. For me, if someone comes and says, I think I'm a narcissist, the likelihood is they aren't a narcissist. They are having the mirror neurons, and there is probably some level of codependency of self-worthiness wounds, which equally a narcissist will have as well. Same, narcissists are codependent as well, a lack of self. But again, the protector parts are what the different elements of this too. But I agree, it is on a spectrum. But if someone no narcissist will come in and say, hey, I think I'm a narcissist, so to speak. But you will get people coming in saying, I think I am a narcissist. But very often it's because of the abusive relationships that they have been in. And if you start to look at those protector parts that come up for them, that acknowledgement in itself means we can get to the self and work on those self-worthiness wounds then too. And a narcissist, you wouldn't be able to do that as such. And this is why there's almost a difference between being a narcissist and narcissism and narcissistic traits, because we all have narcissistic traits. So again, the language that we are using around all of that is really important. And this is why sometimes it causes division when we talk about this, because people will only look through their lens and what they feel and what they think. And, you know, for me, it is about coming from a place of self with compassion for everybody, not excusing behavior, just to understand and helping those who do acknowledge that we can get to those wounds to really do that inner child work and the healing element of that too.
Talk about complex PTSD. You've used that term a few times. Explain that for people, please.
So most people will probably know what PTSD is, so post-traumatic stress disorder, and that tends to be for a single event. So when we think about, you know, those who go and fight in the war or a car crash or something, that is what PTSD is. Complex PTSD is really over a longer period of time. So like domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, it might be kidnapping, hostage, where it's been over a long period of time. And actually, complex PTSD is actually in the DSM. Complex PTSD isn't. I know there's people fighting all the time trying to put it in there, so to speak. But it really is an information processing injury, really. And it is an injury because it's basically how we are then reacting in the present. We're not remembering things from our past. It's like we're reliving them all of the time. And it of our brain, our limbic system, particularly the hippocampus, which is our long-term memory center, almost hasn't time-stamped these events, these things that have happened to us into the past. It's like they're still very live in our system, which is why when we think about how we react to a narcissist, it's like we're reliving all of the time, and it's taking us back to those self-worthiness wounds because it's that version of danger that we have. So our brain hasn't time-stamped these events into the past, recognizing these things happened to us, not because of us. And when we, you know, I mean, I do sort of somatic work with my clients with this, so I'll do things like brain spotting or EMDR, so we can timestamp specific things into the past. That doesn't take away how horrific things were that have happened to you, and it doesn't mean you'll ever forget them. It just means your brain goes, that happened in the past, not now. So I don't need to react like this now. Doesn't mean it's not a challenge right now with the narcissist, but it means then that I can move forward. I can function with my life and everything now. I'm not literally reliving all of this every day as if my brain's going, danger, 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 fight, flight, freeze. We need to go into those responses because it's when I'm 7 again or 5 again. And what we know from research as well is those who have those self-worthiness wounds have a higher propensity then of getting complex PTSD and PTSD because their capacity is already coming from a place of not quite feeling good enough. That's why you could have, just even from, say, a PTSD perspective, 2 people involved in a car crash, one gets PTSD, the other one doesn't. Now, why is that? If it's events that cause trauma, why is it one only gets it and the other one doesn't? And very often it's our capacity to cope from all our past experiences that all come together in all of that too. So it's not one person stronger than the other and that's why, you know, because that person who doesn't get PTSD isn't stronger than the one who does. Probably the one who does get PTSD has probably got a lot more history and a lot more stuff that has happened to them in their childhood and beyond that has really stretched their capacity to cope with all of that. So the complex PTSD, when we talk about narcissistic abuse, is because we're still reacting in the present. Even if we're out of the relationship, even though we're an adult and we're able to extricate ourselves away from a narcissist in that scenario, we're still feeling highly activated all of the time, and that might mean we dissociate, we numb out. It might mean we feel highly anxious and our heart races all of the time, because our brain is still perceiving that this is dangerous. It's not, it's a challenge, but it's not dangerous. And it's all about that perception which comes from our past experiences. So once we've time-stamped all of that into the past, we can then focus on trying to manage, because it is still managing the behavior of the narcissist too, but coming from a place of still feeling safe, coming from a place of adult self, as opposed to a place of a wounded younger part of us, fight, flight, freeze, blended with those parts.
Awesome. I have 2 more questions. Good. Awesome. Yeah. All right. So what would you say to someone that is listening to this today and they're thinking, oh God, this is me, and they're filled with guilt, shame, self-blame. How the hell did I get myself in this position? Why did I marry this person? I can't believe I lost myself in this way. And there's all of that happening. What would you say to someone that's experiencing that right now?
First thing I would say is, I hear you, and it is not your fault. I think they're the key things to start off with, that just being heard and knowing it's not your fault, just to calm the nervous system a bit in that moment. The second thing I would say is, you don't need to do anything immediately with this knowledge, because safety is priority. More homicides happen in the first 7 days of leaving an abusive relationship than any other time. So safety has to be priority here. It's not a case of, oh, I know they're a narcissist, right, I'm going. No, this has to be safe, and we have to create a safe exit strategy for you with this. The third thing I would say is, seek out people like myself listening to your podcast as such, so that you can join online communities. I have a big free Facebook group, for instance, where you can just literally almost be a lurker, if you want, a silent bystander, to just gently go at your pace, so that you can start to see, this isn't you. You're not on your own. This happens to other intelligent people. You're not stupid. It is not your fault. And just those little steps. And I've had people do that. They've joined, say, my free group, and it can be a year even, and then they might take another little step. And that's okay. I'm not there to judge someone on how fast or slow they realize or leave or anything else, because this is their system, and we need to manage their system at the pace their system needs to go. And at no stage am I ever going to judge anybody on that speed, because I haven't walked their shoes. So really, if somebody's listening right now, I hear you and I believe you. It isn't your fault. And it's seeking out communities where you can just gently start to dip your toe in, getting a little bit more knowledge, and then making a decision of what you want to do, but no judgment on that or how fast that happens.
I think what's so hard is, at least again, in my experience with working with clients that have been right here in these shoes, is I look at women, and again, mostly this is women married to narcissistic men. I think, what is the percentage of?
It's about 85% plus.
Yeah.
Women. So yeah, over 85%.
Yeah.
And that's any domestic abuse, but over 85% of perpetrators are male.
Yeah. So I think about the women that I've worked with, and again, and I don't want to exclude men that are listening to this that are, that they're also in an abusive relationship. So this goes out to everybody, but my experience has been women that have sat with me and said to me, I was successful. I had a phenomenal job. I was happy. I had friends. Now look at me. I'm a shell of who I used to be. I stopped working to raise these children. And I now realize I've been gaslit for all of these years. I didn't even know. And now I've become someone I don't even recognize anymore. So again, those women would say, I was healthy before and now I'm not. But I'm listening to you today. And what I hear you saying is, but your self-worth was always very fragile. even though before you had the job, the tons of friends, you were social and everything on the outside might look great, but inside the self-worth was always fragile and probably ready to crack or break. And that's why you attracted this person in. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the self that was cracked, because the self is always there. What
Mm-hmm.
it is are the wounds of the self that happened
Mm-hmm.
in childhood that were there. And then those protector parts, because you're in that abusive relationship, are just showing up more and more. And actually, I always say to women in that scenario, I say, how amazing are you
Yeah.
that you found yourself in this relationship? How amazing is your brain, mind, and body that I hear that you say you're nothing like who you were, but that's because your system has created this kind of protector parts to try and keep you alive. Your system isn't geared up to keep you happy and successful, sadly. It's to keep you alive. And you know what? You are here right now and you are alive. And whilst, yes, you're not living the life we know we want you to live, how amazing that if we look at the relationship you are in, the wounds that you had that attracted going into that relationship, that you have then put all these protector parts up to try and minimize the pain that you felt from your past and stayed in that relationship. How amazing is your system to do that? And then I also say to them, the power now, though, is with you, because the power isn't about changing your partner. The power now is, well, we know all of these parts are there trying to keep you safe from not feeling what that worthiness wound is that came from childhood. That's in your power to heal all of that. Nobody else's. And we can do that. We can go back, because then when we heal that, when we work on that self-worthiness wound, you will start to see your partner completely differently, and you won't need those parts. You won't need to dissociate and numb out with their behavior. You won't need to get angry and try and prove yourself. It doesn't mean they've changed their behavior. It just means you have looked within, and the power within you to heal is already there. It's just your system has been set up to protect you, and it's done a wonderful job up until now. But now we're aware of some challenges and some issues, and we can work with that, and we can now move forward.
That's beautiful. Because I can just hear the self-blame and feel people that are just like
Same.
blaming themselves and shaming themselves.
One of the sentences I probably hear the most from my clients is, I'm so stupid. I hear
Yes.
I said it. How could I be so stupid? And I hear that.
Yeah.
That's a critical protector part, because if I'm stupid, then that might give a reason why I'm in this situation then. Because
Mm-hmm.
almost my system thinks me telling myself I'm stupid is less painful than me sitting there going, I'm so worthless.
Yeah. Oh, so true. Ah. All right. Last question for you. Again, someone that's sitting listening to this saying, this is me. What would be, and again, I like what you said, like, don't up and leave. Like, let's just take a moment. Let's process what we've heard today. What would be some next steps that they can do right now to really start working on their self-worth? Because I'm with you. Something I'm very passionate about in the adult chair is building self-worth. And we do tons of parts work too. So you're speaking my language today, girl. I love it. But self-worth, give us some tips they can do while still in the relationship. They're not springboarding out of their relationship, but to really build up that internal sense of self, so that they can find clarity. Because when we're in these relationships, our reality is so distorted. So to build self-worth is to then start seeing reality much clearer. So what can people do?
So the first thing I would say to do is, if you're not operating from a place of self, that you are coming from a place of being blended with your parts, for instance, you're not actually in the present moment. You're living from your past, and that's why you're blending. You're reliving again. You're not actually remembering. So we can do some real grounding exercises. So I would really invite the listeners to look at the senses and really engage the senses. So that might mean if you went for a walk, for instance, really look at the nature around you, the colors, what you can smell, what you can hear, what you can see. Because when we move away from being ourselves and we're moving into living in our past, we move from a different part of our brain. We move from being in the front part of our brain where we are more logical and rational into our limbic system, which is our emotional part of the brain. So for us to be able to see things more logically and rationally, we need to come back online into the front part of the brain. And to support us to do that, things like burning a candle, for instance, just having a candle where you're really able to smell that, taking that time for yourself, breathing. One of the best breathing exercises I give to my clients is the 5-2-8. So I get them to breathe in for 5, hold for 2, and then exhale for 8. So they're extending that exhale by 3. And it's all to do with our vagus nerve toning. You can extend the exhale by a count of 3. We're saying to our brain, I am safe right now. This may be challenging, but I am safe. Because if you imagine if you are an antelope being chased by a tiger in the wild, there is no way you could extend your exhale by 3 if you were in danger. You'd just be kind of like, and running away. So you extend that exhale. Go and find some music. And when I say music that means something to you, not things that are going to make you cry or anything else like that. For me, I love 80s music and 90s dance music.
Me too.
I know if I go and put that on, it just lifts me. I come back into the front part of my brain because I start singing, which is really good for our vagus nerve. So, it gets me back online again to be able to deal with these things. And this isn't an overnight fix or anything, but the more we can stay online, coming from a place of self, then we can start to create those exit strategies. If it's in a relationship, taking copies of bank statements, finding a safe place where you can put them. If you have a friend where you can start to put things away, if you can set up a separate bank account, again, all safely, contacting local domestic abuse charities in that scenario too. But just while you're in this, it's about one step at a time, sometimes taking 1 hour at a time too, and really looking at those grounding exercises so that you can be online in your brain as much as possible. Feeling present doesn't mean it takes away the situation you are in. It just means you can deal with the situation coming from a place of more clarity then as well.
And I think also that's such a great point. Grounding, getting all 5 senses online also helps us with our reality. We stop doubting ourselves and we start getting really clear about what our person, our partner is saying to us. And we stop saying, oh, wait, are they right or am I right? We know, oh, no, they're gaslighting me, period. And there isn't a doubt in our minds. So, you're a wealth of information, my darling. This was so great. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
More people we can get to know all of this stuff.
I know. It's about raising awareness, isn't it? All around the world, people need this information. So how would people find you?
So I am on Instagram. People can come and find me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well. I have a big free group for women on Facebook, Narcissistic Abuse and Trauma Recovery for Women. Again, on my website, you can contact me through my website if you've got any questions about any one-to-one work, or I have a narcissistic trauma recovery program, which is a 12-step recovery program with a membership integration as well. So, any of those ways, if people want to get in touch, and I genuinely get back to everybody in however capacity that I can to try and support them with where they are at as well, because I can still remember what it was like, and if I can help just one more person each day, then we've got to keep doing it. There's work to be done.
I love it. What is your Instagram handle?
Caroline Strawson. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, perfect.
Anytime, just look up my name, Caroline Strawson. I've got a book as well on Amazon. Divorce Became My Superpower, because I genuinely believe it did.
Awesome. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I loved this. I loved our time, and thank you for the work that you're doing all around the world. It's greatly needed. I appreciate it.
Thank you.